This is a listener's Q&A episode, which I'm excited about because it has been a while since I've done a Q&A podcast. I'm going to touch on the latest ban of red dye number 3, which is no longer allowed in the United States. And I'm going to dive into that, what you need to know about it, how to stay safe, what to watch out for, and why this is even a big deal. Then I'm going to dive into some listener questions. I'm going to touch on food addictions and whether or not that's real, how to diet while having certain health conditions. I'm going to touch on carb cycling and more. If you are on your fitness and health journey, this is going to be a great episode for you to learn how to be healthier and get to your result no matter what gets in your way. All right, let's get into the podcast. Welcome to the Choose Hard podcast. I am your host, Cody McBroom, the founder of Tailored Coaching Method, a world-renowned online fitness and nutrition coaching company helping average people achieve above-average physiques and live above-average lives. Today, we're going to dive through some questions, which I'm excited about. It's been a while. It's been a minute since I've done a Q&A, and I'm going to kind of get through as many as I can. I think I have about 5 or 6 that I know I am going to for sure touch on, and if there is time left on the mixer, then I'll keep going and I'll answer some more. But if you want to get your question in, make sure that you, one of two things. Either A, if you're on Spotify, you can leave a comment on the episodes now. It's like Spotify's its own freaking social media to an extent. So if you want to ask a question on Spotify, just drop a comment below. If you are watching this on YouTube, you can comment below on the video and ask a question as well. And if not, on all platforms, no matter where you're listening or watching this, there is a link directly to a Q&A form that you can answer, ask me anything, and it's in private. That way people don't see it publicly. Now, today's Q&A, we're going to dive right in. I'm going to open this podcast brought to you by Jocko Fuel. It's probably not how Jocko says it. I highly encourage you to go watch the reel I just posted as I'm recording this today. So you have to go back a little bit because you're going to get this a couple weeks after. We always record a couple weeks in advance, but I recorded a red dye number 3 reel for Jocko. So it's on my page and theirs. And I just love the way Jocko comes in at the end. It's like like a gun sound cocking, and then it's like Jocko Fuel, and he like slides in. It's pretty dope. Okay, so the first question and topic we're going to dive into is actually red dye number 3. Red dye number 3 is a ban. I've had a lot of clients ask about this, and I've had multiple people message me and just ask my thoughts on it. And luckily, I knew that I was going to be posting a reel. And so since I posted that, I've had less questions, which is good. But I know that people are still kind of wondering. And there's a lot out there about artificial dyes and colors going into products. And it's pretty crazy. I'm going to kind of state some facts, and then I'm going to give you guys my opinion and what I suggest you do. Because I think that at the end of the day, there's this balance to be had with achieving optimal health and not being a hippie weirdo. And so no offense to any hippie weirdos who are listening to this, but I mean that in the most sincere way. We all want optimal health, but then we see these people online who are posting things about, like I saw one the other day, I commented on it from my good buddy Brad. It was a reel that he made like with the other person's video on the screen kind of thing, where it's almost like they're making fun of the reel. And the guy was like, point of view, when you avoid tap water, you don't touch plastics. Like, it was just all this crazy stuff where I'm like, bro, I get it. Like, I like filtered water too. Like, I have a Brita filter and it helps. And I try to drink out of that as much as I can. But like, you're not going to die if you drink tap water. And this is what I mean by there's a difference between chasing optimal health and being just a complete hippie weirdo that basically walks on eggshells all day long. Like, there's no way that life is enjoyable. Like, there's no way that life is enjoyable, right? And so I say this because when it comes to things like dyes, artificial dyes, like colors, I think that there's enough proof and evidence now to avoid it, but it's not something that you need to freak out about, right? And this is kind of what I said in the reel, where it was like, there's a good chance you've been consuming this, and then it was like sirens and alarms in a hospital, a person with a gas mask. It was funny because at the end of the day, like, again, it's going to be in certain things that we can't avoid. For example, it's in children's Tylenol. Like, if your child has 103-degree fever, there's been times where, due to my daughter's kidney issue, she has had 103, 104-degree fever, and we have freaked out. It's been scary and whatever. I'm going to give her Tylenol with or without the dye, because it's important that we get her fever down, right? It's important to get her temperature down more than anything right now. If you are consuming foods that, one, probably make you overweight to begin with, because most of the foods that are going to have these dyes in it are cupcakes, frostings, alcoholic drinks, syrups, candy, stuff like that, you're already doing yourself a disservice by eating a lot of those foods. And then the second thing is that you can't, you can eliminate as much as possible, of course, but you also have to be aware of what foods have dyes in them so that you can avoid as many as you can and then live your life, right? Like, sometimes you're going to have those, like, I love an old fashioned, right? I'm pretty sure those cherries, the Maro whatever cherries that come in the like syrup and everything, I'm like 90% sure there's plenty of red dye number 3 in there, right? I'm going to avoid alcohol for the most part. But on the occasion that I drink, which is usually once a week, and of the once a week drinking, when I do feel like an old fashioned, I'm going to have a cherry, and it is what it is. So like, okay, that's my point, right? Because there's a part where like chasing optimal health can't also remove complete social activities and environments, and it cannot remove or harm mental health because you're walking on eggshells and you're paranoid all the time. Like, don't be a artificial dye paranoia person, right? Like, that's not the goal here. That's not why I'm filling you in on this. Okay, so what we do need to know about red dye number 3. First and foremost, red dye number 3 has been banned. So it's officially banned from the United States. And the truth is, it's actually been banned from a lot of other places. So it's been banned from a lot of other countries, especially in Europe and such, for years now. Like, it's been gone. So this isn't something that is like we just found out is probably dangerous. Unfortunately, it's been something that has been known to be probably dangerous. In fact, it's been known long enough to where they actually removed it from cosmetic products in 1990 in the United States, which blows my mind, because now that tells us that, hey, the United States decides, FDA is like, hey, this is too dangerous to put on our skin. We need to remove it from all cosmetic products in the entire country. 1990. So as you can imagine, from 1990 till now, that is what, 35 years of advancements in science. That tells me that we've put red dye in more things since then, because it didn't get banned from everything. And 2, it tells me that we can sense, study, and research a lot more. And that's enough time for studies to actually go through. So a lot of times when we study something, it might take a year or two to actually publish the study after the year or two of studying it, right? And so it can be a long process. But 35 years, like, that's plenty of time. Knowing this, that it's too dangerous for our skin, I don't understand why we continue to consume it. So like, the FDA is like, you know what? We don't want you to put lotion and makeup on your skin if it has red dye number 3. But if you want to eat it, and if you want your children to take medicine with it, like, that's totally fine. Insane. Here's the other thing. It's in stuff like medications, right? I already said Tylenol, things like that, right? Benadryl, I believe, maybe, but a good example of to why this is pointless and you don't need it. If it's in Tylenol, right, to make it easier for the child to enjoy, understandable, especially because you shouldn't need Tylenol that often. However, it's just a coloring agent. So it's just changing the color. In fact, the purpose of it, I have it written down. Its purpose is to, and I quote, give foods, medications, and drinks a cherry red color. That's its purpose. That's its benefit, to give food, medications, and drinks a cherry light color. When we look at Tylenol for children, and then we look at something that is, usually you alternate between this and Tylenol if your kid's really sick, and it can be just as useful most of the time, if not all the time. Motrin, which is another syrup, medication, ibuprofen-like substance for a child, pain reducer, fever reducer, right? it's clear. Why? Because they don't put dye in it. And I don't know about any of the parents listening to this, but my daughter has zero issues with taking that versus Tylenol. Like, there's no difference. She doesn't go, well, this one's clear, I don't like it. No. In fact, some of her favorite juices, which don't contain red dye number 3, she never says anything about the color at all. You know, and truthfully, they're smart, and this might be why they put it in. So like this can that I'm holding, if you're watching this, but if you're listening to this, I'm holding this Jocko Go can. It's an energy drink. If I poured it in a cup, it'd be clear. Would it still taste the same? I don't know, because the can's yellow because it's pineapple coconut, and maybe I'd placebo. You know, I like it better taste out of the can. I don't know. Maybe that's how kids are with juice boxes. You can't tell it's clear, and that's great, smart. But the point is that it doesn't really do us any good, right? In fact, it does bad. So here's why they banned it. The reason it was banned is because research has consistently linked to this ingredient, mostly in higher dosages, potentially producing thyroid cancer. And I say potentially producing thyroid cancer only because in the studies it literally created thyroid cancer. But I say potentially because it was in high doses and it was in rats. Now, the reason they're banning this is because rats are very similar to humans from a physiological, genetic, like hormonal, like there's a lot of things, unfortunately, with rats that are similar to humans that we can test rats and we can get the result for humans. And they've confirmed that with red dye number 3 being consumed in high doses with rats. And there's also plenty of it's not technically research, but documentation of a kid's daily meals and drinks adding up to the same amount of red dye, right? It's like I think they say that higher doses like go beyond 50 milligrams a day or something, if I read that correctly. And I want to say one thing of Kool-Aid has 50 milligrams of red dye number 3, which is crazy. So it's been linked to producing thyroid cancer. There's also been some studies pointing towards behavioral issues in children, like hyperactivity and inattention, so not being able to pay attention. In fact, they actually even have, I want to say it was Stanford, did another research study on kids with ADHD, and they were even more sensitive to this. And there's plenty of anecdotal evidence of this from parents too. I've even heard personally, like relationships that I have, their parents who removed red dye completely and just tried to remove all dyes in general, to be honest, because red dye number 3 might be the culprit for the thyroid cancer producing ingredient, but multiple dyes have been shown to potentially cause behavioral issues in children. And I got to imagine if it's causing behavior issues with children, it's probably causing them with us too, adults. But point is that I've seen multiple kids from households have better behavior when they remove red dye number 3. It also makes you wonder too, like sometimes people say, too much sugar. And you're like, okay, well, what was the sugar? It was candy, it was cupcakes, it was cookies, it was baked goods, it was juices. Is it the sugar? Maybe it is. But also usually you go to a birthday party, kids are running around, they might be burning off all that sugar. You know, and there's also red dye and other dyes too in all of those products. So what is it, you know? Okay, so I want to just kind of crank through all these bullets because I want to make sure I give you as much information as possible. It was estimated back in 2016 that 43% of foods marketed towards children contained food dyes. So let's add 8+ years to that now, you know, 2016 to 2025, that's 8.5 years, because it's the beginning of the year as I'm recording this, and adult foods adding into that mix. So 8+ years, plus if we factor in all the foods marketed towards adults, right? Alcoholic beverages, sodas, even just full, like, I mean, even things like, what was it? I was eating, and this was one of my favorite protein snacks. I don't usually like things like Quest bars and all that. I love Tom Bilyeu, who founded it, because I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great product in general, and he's from Tacoma, so like he's like from my area, so I like him a lot. But they bug my stomach, and so I usually have like the protein Pop-Tarts, the legendary ones. Love those. I think they taste amazing, especially the chocolate one. There's red dye number 3. I think there's number 40 as well, and there's yellow lake number 3 and stuff, which is weird. Why do they call it yellow lake? I don't know. It's weird. Anyway, if we add 8+ years plus all the adult foods into that mix, it would be way over 43%, which is crazy. 43% of foods marketed towards children, you know, it's nuts. And it's not even 43% of foods, because let's be honest, there's no marketing for bananas. Like, it's very, you know, marketing is just for packaged goods. So it's pretty crazy. Its purpose is to just give the color, meaning it's really pointless. It's not going to change the flavor, as I said before. And it's just, overall, it's not good. There's no point. So at the end of the day, it's a useless ingredient, really. It's really not doing anything for us. It's changing the color of what we consume, but maybe there's a placebo effect. If we see red fruit punch, we might like it more, versus if we see clear fruit punch, we might not. If you have children and you're worried about that, because that is an absolute, it is absolutely a potential factor in, placebo is very real. So it could very well cause a kid to not like the juice as much. Put it in a container that is not clear so that they can't see the liquid, and you'll remove the placebo effect. That is how a study would do it if they wanted to remove the placebo effect, which is commonly done in research. We've been slowly removing. We are removing all of it out of our household. It's not good. It's one of those things where it's like, there's enough research for them to ban it from the country. I'm not going to consume it, and God forbid I have something that has it in every once in a while. It is what it is. As I'm recording this, tomorrow is my daughter's birthday. She's going to have some red dye number 3, I promise. Like, I'm literally picking up cupcakes from the store bakery after I record this episode. So there's going to be red dye number 3 in there. But I would rather her have it once a year, twice a year because of holidays and celebrations, versus every damn day because she's constantly eating cookies and juice and things that have it in there, right? So I would highly recommend it. It is a potential cause thyroid cancer. This is long-term stuff. So you're not going to drink red dye and keel over right after that. You're not going to start having cancer immediately, but it is going to slowly fester in and it can slowly deteriorate your health. And that's something we want to avoid completely. And the fact that there is potential behavioral issues, which could be individually dependent, I'm not even going to take a risk on that, right? So 2 really, really big reasons. And then obviously I want to mention this because I am a sponsored athlete of them. They support Tailored Coaching Method and the Choose Hard podcast, but Jocko Fuel supplement company, owned by Jocko and Chris Pratt. Again, they are our sponsors. They are who we recommend for supplements, and they are full. They've basically filled my entire pantry and now my fridge in the gym. They never used it to begin with, which is really cool. Like, their whole slogan is hard work, clean fuel, no excuses, and they stand by that. So the cool thing is that before this ban even came out, they already removed it. So there was no red dye number 3 in any of their products. So it was something that was never a concern or never needed to be a concern because nothing's changing. Whereas other companies and other supplement brands obviously use it a lot. It's very, very common. And they're going to have to be pulling things off shelves, right? They're going to be pulling things off shelves. And unfortunately, that means that they might be changing some of their products. And you might see that a lot in the next couple years. And I say couple years because although it got banned on, I want to say it was January 27th, but definitely January of 2025, just happened this year at the end of January, it doesn't have to be pulled off shelves until 2027. So I'm assuming they do that because these companies make things in such mass production and quantities, and most of those companies who are using red dye, they're probably using it in products that last a lifetime. They have a long shelf life, and so they're not forcing it to be pulled off shelves or out of companies' ingredient list until 2027, which is truthfully, honestly, is probably better for the economy, obviously, because we don't want to go into a massive, if we have to pull all those off shelves and everything, that can obviously hurt some of these businesses. And when many, many, many businesses are hurt, obviously that's not going to help the economy grow. So I think it's a smart decision, but that does mean you got to watch out for things. So you can start limiting it, or you can start eliminating things completely from your diet that have red dye number 3. And I would highly recommend this if you have children. Pull it out of their stuff. It's in children's food. It's even in baby food, which is really crazy. And it's you're primarily going to find it in sweets, candy, treats, baked goods, juices, sodas, frosting, sprinkles, medicines. I'm trying to think of what we pulled out of our house too. A big thing for us was sprinkles, because Blake loves sprinkles, and frostings and stuff like that, and candy. But most chocolate doesn't have it in there. Obviously, most fruity candy does, but a lot of them have gotten ahead of it and started pulling some of those things out because there's been this movement of no artificial colors for a while. Okay, so that's the scoop on red dye number 3. I would recommend just trying to remove most of the dyes out of your food anyway, because there's usually an option of something better. It's why I'm so glad that I'm with Jocko now, because now I can just drink Jocko Go all the time. And they actually have nootropics in their energy drinks, which I love. Acetyl L-carnitine, caffeine, alpha GPC, theobromine, L-theanine. It's literally perfect. Like, it has all the nootropics I need in there. And the caffeine is only 95 milligrams, which is good because most energy drinks have like 160 or more. Some of the ones like C4 and Rain and Bang and what's the other one? Ghost, which are great. They all have like 200 plus milligrams of caffeine, which is a lot. And I drink multiple a day. So this is this is a good, healthy move for me. All right. Next, we'll dive into the questions. I had quite a few questions on red dye number 3, so I'm glad we covered that to begin with. First question is from Miss Army Girl 215. Shout out to you. If you are legitimately an Army girl and you're in the Army, I salute you. I respect you. Thank you for your service. What type of advice would you be able to give someone who suffers with different health conditions that limit them on what they can eat? So, I messaged back and said that I would love some more context. So this question, amongst some of the other ones I'm going to answer, come from my broadcast channel. So if you want to jump in there, go to Instagram.com/CodyMcBroom, just my normal page. Choose Hard is my broadcast channel. If you click in there, I usually give first dibs, or if there's enough questions, I just don't even ask anywhere else, which is what I did this time. Go in there to get first dibs on questions. Like, I asked there first because they are in my tribe. So jump in the Choose Hard broadcast channel, which is linked in the description of this podcast, or you can just go to my Instagram. So I messaged her back in there and asked if I could get specifics, if she felt comfortable with it, because obviously I could give more detailed answer. I didn't get any specifics back from her, which is fine. But this is going to be just broad spectrum advice, because without a specific diagnosis that I'm referring to or something specific that I can say, hey, because it's this specific thing, this is what I would do, whatever, then I have to give just general advice, okay? So what type of advice would I give to someone who suffers with different health conditions that limit them on what they can eat? The reality is that I would focus on principles. And I think the best way I can answer this question without knowing what the exact ailment or health condition is to say focus on principles. And the reality is this almost applies to everything in life, but especially when we consider training and nutrition. Principles govern outcomes, right? That is like the best way to describe it. So if we think of what gets results, we can think of principles, okay? So principles govern outcomes. Methods develop plans and strategies to employ the principle, okay? Gravity, that is a principle. Flight, technically, that's a principle, and you have to understand, I want to say it's drag, thrust, lift, and is it velocity? Maybe distance? I don't know. My mentor Garrett would be able to say it. But anyway, there's, gravity is a principle. Calories in, energy balance, that is a principle, right? And so the easiest way to look at this is if we look at paleo, carnivore, keto, intermittent fasting, macros, if it fits your macros, maybe I already said that, every diet you can think of, Mediterranean, all these things, they're all going to have different applications from a health perspective, of course. Mediterranean diet is going to be probably the healthiest of them all, in my opinion, but that is just an opinion because certain people are going to benefit more from a diet like that than others. Keto is going to be healthy for certain people, and it's going to be terrible for others. Carnivore is going to be good for like a couple people. No, it can be okay for, and this is like, I hope this doesn't go on record. Well, it is going to record. This could be good for a couple people that have digestive issues. Like, it can be useful for digestive issues temporarily because truthfully, this is the thing though, it has nothing to do with the meat. It has everything to do with removing everything else, right? But once you remove everything else for a long period of time, you can have some serious health consequences because of it. And so again, we come back to the principles though. What is the principle about that, is with all these diets? Energy balance, calories in versus calories out. Calorie deficit leads to weight loss. So all of these diets can more easily cause deficit without tracking because you remove so much. If I am following a keto diet, I remove all carbs. If I am following carnivore, I remove everything but meat. If I am following a paleo, I remove everything processed. If I am following intermittent fasting, I remove everything eaten before a certain time. Like, the list goes on. What is a common denominator amongst all these diets is the fact that you are removing a big chunk of food that creates a deficit naturally and intuitively. And when you're in a deficit, you lose body fat and weight. Normally, the health results of all of these diets is actually due to the calorie deficit, not to the food itself. The only caveat I would say there is that the Mediterranean diet is a really, really healthy diet that actually does promote health with or without a deficit, right? Because essentially, let's say you're following paleo and having processed foods. Removing processed foods won't make you healthier because you're already eating whole foods. If you're already eating mostly paleo, you're already eating whole foods, and you just remove processed foods, you're not becoming healthier because of the removal of processed foods, because you don't get healthier by eating more vitamins and minerals. That's not how it works. You're getting healthier because you remove those. That puts you in a calorie deficit. You lose body weight, which is primarily body fat. And the lower your body fat is, before getting to the point of being shredded, the more healthy you will be. Your health numbers will increase. Lipids, cholesterol, blood pressure, all these things will actually improve as your body fat lowers. So it's not the diet, it's the deficit, right? So the principle here is the deficit. And so I say that and I explain it that way because my advice for anybody who has health conditions and has to really, really pay attention to and watch what they eat is to just abide by the principles. If you abide by the principles of energy balance, first and foremost, meaning if I want to lose body fat, then I need to be in a deficit. If I want to build muscle, then I need to be in a surplus. If I want to get stronger, maintain muscle tissue, build muscle, have any type of impressive physique and health, I need to have enough protein. You know, if you're sedentary, that's on the lower end of the spectrum of like, around 0.8 grams per pound is plenty if you're sedentary. But if you're training hard, probably should have a gram per pound, maybe even more, right? And so these principles of protein equals recovery, calories in versus calories out equals weight management, up or down. Like, those are the principles you need to abide by. And then the foods that you are allowed to eat, depending on your health condition, are what you fill your diet with to meet the principles. So you're not really following a method. Your method is created for you. That's kind of the idea behind Tailored Coaching Method too. It's like our company it's a tailored coaching method. We abide by scientific principles and we tailor the method to the individual. That's the whole point. The same applies with training. If somebody is creating enough tension on the muscle and doing enough volume per week, they're going to build muscle, right? How do we make that happen for them? Well, it depends. Do they have weak body parts, strong body parts? Do they have long limbs, short limbs? Are they a beginner, intermediate, advanced? Like there's all these different things that force us to tailor the methods to them. But we always abide by the principle. They want to build muscle. We got to create a lot of tension, and we got to increase total volume of sets per muscle group per week. Those are principles of muscle growth. Okay. So that's the advice I would give, is really, really pay attention to the principles. And if anybody listening to this has no health conditions, but you want to use that advice to apply to any other context of life, anything you're struggling to figure out the how with. So I'm building a business. How do I grow the business? I'm trying to lose body fat. How do I lose body fat? Trying to build muscle. How do I build muscle? Trying to get healthier. How do I get healthier? Trying to have a good relationship. How do I build a good relationship? There's principles in every aspect of life. And so if you find the principles, you'll find where you're either falling short or just need to patch up some of the holes. All right. Next question. Coach Coos, my man. What approaches do you take with clients who struggle with food addiction? Okay, so there's a really good article on the website that was written by our Chief Science Officer, Dr. Brandon Roberts. I'm going to link that in the description of this episode, about whether or not food addiction is real. And I highly encourage, if this question hits you, I want you to encourage you to go read that, because it is based on what research shows with food addiction. And it'll teach you a lot. Now, I'm going to speak on my own experience and what I find to be the case with food addiction. What I find to be the case with food addiction is that I think true food addiction is not something I've ever experienced with a client. And it's not because I haven't worked with people, because I have, who struggle with overeating, struggle with binging, struggle with snacking, struggle with feeling like they might be addicted to food. But the truth is food generally doesn't have very many addictive properties outside of the dopamine fix that we get when we have something tasty. But we can essentially point that dopamine fix elsewhere. I just did a presentation for the Collective, which is our members portal. There's a link for that in the description as well. If you like full presentations, we do 2 a month for $50 a month, which is honestly wild. Especially because I know what it costs to hear me speak, and like to hear others speak. It's crazy. So, but I did a talk on, essentially the arrival fallacy and the departure fallacy, and post-achievement depression is what they call it in science. I call it post-achievement blues because I don't like to use the word depression, because for some people it's like, well, I wasn't depressed, but I definitely had a slump after I reached my goal, and that's really common. All these things though, like what it all points to is this dopamine aspect. And really what we have to do is be able to point the dopamine we're receiving and what is triggering the dopamine in the right direction, right? So instead of pointing for the goal or the post-achievement depression, it's like instead of posting or pointing your dopamine fix or receiving your dopamine fix from the end goal target, the achievement, we need to point it at the day-to-day actions, the week-to-week progress, the process itself, every step of the way, because that's how we build the dopamine and attach ourselves to the process and who we are becoming versus what we will achieve. Because if we identify with what we will achieve, the moment we don't feel like we have that fully, or somebody doesn't give us the credit we deserve in our minds, we lose that sensation, that feeling of dopamine, and we feel very, very sad because of it. So I think with food, it's very similar to where there are some chemicals through certain foods. If you ever read like The Hungry Brain, I had the author of that podcast. He's a researcher at UW. I had him on the podcast way back. I'm blanking on his name. It was a couple years ago. It was a great podcast and great book, Hungry Brain. But point is there are triggers that happen in our brain. It's mostly with highly palatable food, right? And so that is going to be foods that mix high fats and high sugars. Usually it's trans fat, but high fats, high sugars, and usually salt as well. It's like if you take just salt, you don't want to have a ton of it. If you take just butter, you don't really want to have a ton of it. If you take just a sweet potato, you can only eat so much of it. But if you put, especially Kerrygold grass-fed butter, I'm telling you, it's the best, butter on a sweet potato and then put salt on it, you can eat 10 times more. Like you can eat so much more because that combination is somewhat addictive, right? And so what approach do I take? Number one, I'm going to try to remove the highly palatable items out of their diet, because we know that if any one food tends to be overly addictive, it's probably going to be foods that are highly palatable or have a very, very strong sugar. So like candy of some sort. But again, usually it's a highly palatable food like ice cream, right, which has sugar and has a lot of fat. So you got the cream and the fat and the salt, and you have the sugar involved, right? So we have everything together. I'm going to try to remove most of those foods from the diet, right? Which they're probably wanting to do. And this is why I say somebody who has a true food addiction, I probably haven't worked with, because most of the time those people are in some kind of like clinic or therapy because they're extremely, extremely obese. They usually have, 200 pounds to lose, and they're in a really hard spot. Like those people usually go to a form of therapy or outpatient versus actually just hiring a coach. We've worked with countless people who have lost over 100 pounds, but even then, it's not quite food addiction. They want to change, and they can change. They need guidance. So we remove those highly palatable foods first and foremost, and then we're going to start trying to shift their mindset a little bit and really start to point where our attention goes as far as what we're trying to pull dopamine from. Can we pull it to the positive habits, and can we pull it to those by forming habit trackers? Can we do that by weighing in and seeing weight loss and doing some form of slowly progressive weight training and activity that we can point to the wins on a daily basis and go, hey, you just hit a higher step count. Hey, you just lost 2 pounds. Hey, you just hit 7 days in a row on your habit tracker. Hey, you do this journaling drill that is basically asking you questions that triggers that dopamine. Like you can change where you get your dopamine from by shifting your activities, your habits, and your actions. And that's usually what we're going to do from a coaching approach, is give them the right tools and habits and practices to try to get dopamine from the positive things. That way, if there's any type of cycle of repetitiveness due to feeling, I don't like the word addiction, but like being addicted to anything, we're going to become addicted to the things that are enforcing positive habits, good results, and weight loss, right? And we're going to avoid those things that are negative that give us the dopamine fix. And that does happen by consistently doing positive things that give us that same dopamine kick. And then also the affirmations from them, as well as the reaffirming comments and guidance from a coach, that goes a long way in shifting their mindset to get them away from the food addiction. So that's my 2 cents on it. I think that's the best way to go about it. Jan Han, what are your thoughts on carb cycling? I love the episode about higher carb diets. I really enjoyed recording that podcast. So definitely go check out that if you haven't yet. The high carb fat loss episode I did a couple weeks ago. It's basically why a high carb diet is 5 reasons why a high carb diet is actually going to probably be better for your fat loss progress. I also have a really, really in-depth blog. I would call it a guide on carb cycling that I'll link in the description of this podcast. So what are my thoughts on carb cycling in general? Truthfully, I think it's a cool topic or aspect, but only in writing. Like on paper, it sounds really promising. It sounds really cool. And you'll see that in the article that I wrote if you go check it out. Like I really dive into the research and the science of both what research shows about carb cycling specifically, and then also what research shows about replenishing glycogen and what carbs give us and everything. And at the end of it, what I found was that really it's just more beneficial to have carbs in your diet if you're training hard. A low carb diet's not going to serve you well if you're training hard in the gym. Whether your goal is fat loss or it's muscle growth or it's performance, carbs are always going to benefit you. It really is. And a high carb diet is not going to do much outside of help you adhere to it if you are on a diet. So I think that it's kind of one of those things that isn't actually as applicable as most people think, because carb cycling, this idea that we increase carbs on some days, decrease them on other days, and we sync up the high carb days with the high training days, the low carb days with the rest days, doesn't make a whole lot of sense when we actually, if you dig into the research and the science behind the digestion, absorption, depletion, and replenishment of glycogen, carbohydrates in the body, and how the body works. And if we look at how the body actually utilizes carbs as a fuel, how long it takes for us to digest, break down, and absorb the nutrients and then put them into the bloodstream to deliver them to the muscle and replenish glycogen stores for training that were once depleted, and how much it takes to actually deplete glycogen stores from training, you find that like you can't really line those things up because it's never the same, because different varying factors will differ your carb depletion and replenishment rate, your digestion rate, all those kind of things. But also on top of that, if I'm eating high carb on a leg day, doesn't make a whole lot of sense because it takes a while, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is if I do high and low, and let's say I had a low day the day before my leg day is actually going to suffer, because I'm not going to be able to eat, digest, absorb, and replenish glycogen fast enough to actually support my leg training the next day, right? Like it'll take time. So I find it really unbeneficial. And when you actually look at the science, it makes sense on paper. But when you actually look at the research, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have low carb days on rest days. I actually think that's the opposite of what you should do. If I'm training heavy the next day, I actually don't want to be low carb because I want to make sure that my glycogen stores are tapped out and full so that tomorrow I actually train hard. But on top of that, I just trained hard yesterday, let's say. I want to continue recovering well, right? Because recovery is where we adapt and build muscle and strength. So actually, I want carbs to be at least where they're normally at on my rest days, because those aren't just rest days. Those are recovery days. Those are replenishment days. You don't want to remove carbs on a rest day if that is the day you're supposed to optimize your recovery and actually replenish the carbohydrates and glycogen that you may have depleted the day before. So carb cycling in general just doesn't really make a lot of sense when we get into the nuts and bolts of the science. What we do know is that if somebody is and these are the couple contexts that I would apply it, if we look at carb cycling for the individual losing fat, research shows it doesn't matter because your weekly total average pans out to be the same. So if we're just looking at fat loss, not muscle growth or anything else, fat loss will not be greater from carb cycling up and down. It will be exactly the same so long as your protein and calories are met, because at the end of the week, if your total calorie average is the same as it would have been if you were not carb cycling, you're not going to have any benefit to the carb cycling. So the only way that carb cycling helps you in a fat loss diet to get better results is if having high days and low days helps you from an adherence perspective and you are more consistent with the diet day to day, week to week, because you're carb cycling. And if you are more consistent, that means you're more accurately hitting and consistently hitting your weekly total average calories that you're supposed to be hitting. And that's going to lead to the deficit you need to be in to lose weight, right? Otherwise, it doesn't do anything, okay? When we look at carb cycling from a refeed perspective, there might be some benefits to muscle endurance and growth and replenishment. Like, refeed studies are different. When you have 3 days in a row of high carbs, that's going to be different. But that's also because you did a string of low carb days and then you had 3 days in a row after 2 weeks of dieting. It's mostly mental, but you will see some muscle benefit as well, just from maintaining muscle tissue because you're replenishing glycogen, you're training hard, so on and so forth. But there's not going to be any significant benefit because you can't build muscle that quick. You're not going to build a ton of muscle in a few days, right? And that's more the refeed side of things. When we look at carb cycling from a sport performance perspective, it can make sense because you're training, and this is not like low days and high days. This is like your normal. And then if you're in a tournament or if you have a varying intensity and output level, energy expenditure wise, then it might make sense to have high days, but it's going to be more intuitive. So when I've worked with like high level CrossFit athletes or athletes playing rugby at a high level, people in tournaments, endurance runners, things like that. If we have, we're accumulating miles and some days have more miles than others. And some days it's intuitive. Like I need to hit 10 to 15 miles today and they end up hitting 15. Then we need to be able to intuitively change their carb numbers to fuel what they've done. And if their training is changing week to week, or they're having tournaments or they're in season and off season, then their energy expenditure varies and we're not trying to lose weight. We're trying to support the performance they're doing. And that means we are carb cycling, but it's very individual and intuitive. And it varies as the weeks and days and training sessions go on because we're changing it kind of on the fly, right? We're changing it based on what changes we're seeing in live time with their training or their sport, so on and so forth. So carb cycling, overall, it makes no sense for fat loss unless it is going to help you with adherence. For muscle growth, it doesn't really make sense because unless we consider carb cycling being like an extra 20 to 30 grams of intra-workout carbs, which I do often. And it's like, hey, don't track these. Just drink this powdered carb shake while you lift. Yeah, we have a little bit more carbs, but it's intra-workout. And it's really just a way for us to keep our calories high, right? And then for sport performance, it can make sense because you need to change things, but it's not as literal as most people think. Like, okay, I'm eating 250 on my high days and 150 on my low days, and I'm going to alternate. Like, it doesn't work like that. But again, like I have used carb cycling from a fat loss perspective simply from an adherence, right? Like I know when I go, hey, we're going to do 3 low days in a row and then 1 high day, that actually is going to help this person because having low days 7 days a week is going to drain them. It's going to be hard for their lifestyle. They're going to have a hard time adhering to it, so on and so forth. So I might want to give them 1 refeed day, right? I have a client recently that I actually dropped her calories lower on her other days because it was a small enough difference because it's a small female. It was a small enough difference that it wouldn't make her life harder to eat 15 grams less each day. But if I, for example, instead of pulling 15, I can just pull 20, that gives me an extra day of 50 grams up or whatever it ended up being on 1 day a week. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was basically like I could create a bigger weekly deficit by a decent amount, especially because she is a small female. So it's not too hard to create a bigger deficit by doing some form of carb cycling. And she has 2 refeeds per week. So it's like low, low, high, low, 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 high, I think. But point being is doing that allowed me to create a bigger deficit each week. And it's actually going to work in her favor from an adherence perspective compared to the other one, which would have been more calories per day on the low days, but there's no refeeds. So there's never a break from it, right? And so even with the refeeds, it actually created a bigger weekly deficit and it gave her that chance to be like, okay, now I get some more food. So that's an example of how it would work to actually apply this in a fat loss perspective successfully. And I think we're going to wrap it up at that question. We have a few more on the list, but I'm going to save those for next time because I know they are cans of worms that I will just go on rants with, and I think it's going to be good rants. So I'm going to save those for the next podcast Q&A that we do. Thank you so much for listening to this. I can't say it enough. I appreciate you so much tuning in and being a part of the Choose Hard podcast, the Choose Hard community, and being somebody who wants to constantly level up. If you enjoyed this podcast, if it has helped you any way today in this episode or in any other episode, please do me a huge favor. Go leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple and or Spotify. It helps more than you know. Share this with a friend if you can, because people need to hear this. It is free, and we are here to help people get better. And of course, come back, listen to the next episode, and continue growing with me. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time.